Do you remember a time where injuries like these were commonplace in hockey?
Avec une pénalité qui est amplement méritée. Et là, les soigneurs savent faire autour de Keller, qui est toujours...
They're trying to touch up for icing. Drilled into the boards by Torrey Mitchell.
He'll dump it all the way back in the Carolina zone. It makes the line, and hustling in and injured on the play, Joni Pitkanen.
The icing rule in the NHL was initially introduced way back in 1937 to get rid of the common delaying tactic used by teams to defend leads by just throwing the puck out of their zone and all the way down the ice. However, the rule has resulted in several career-ending injuries, including Carolina's Joni Pitkanen, who suffered a broken heel while racing for a puck to get an icing call. Other hockey bodies, such as the IIHF, had already implemented no-touch icing in 1990 after an incident in the Czech League, when a race for the puck resulted in the untimely death of a 26-year-old Ludek Chaika. Many fans and members of the NHLPA had been calling for hybrid icing to be implemented in the NHL prior to Pitkanen's injury. However, as it always seems to be, it took another career to be ended before serious changes were made. After Pitkanen's career-ending injury, the NHL introduced hybrid icing the following season in the 2013-2014 season. This rule change made it so players no longer had to touch the puck, but rather just needed to race to the face-off dot to get the icing whistle. This gave players sufficient time to decelerate and avoid unnecessary and dangerous contact with the end boards. And the impact of this change is evident, as you can see in this graph, that shows the injury rate per 100 players for typical injuries caused by chases for icings. This includes things like ankle, back, foot, knee, leg, neck, and shoulder injuries. There's a clear downward trend since the implementation of hybrid icing in 2013. This rule change not only made the league safer, but didn't really change the experience of watching hockey in any meaningful way. That's a win in my books. Hitting is synonymous with hockey. Without the physicality, there is no hockey. But the rules behind what hits are allowed versus which hits are illegal have always been blurry at best. As an unfortunate byproduct of this blurriness, many players have lost their careers due to dangerous hits to the head. For the longest time, there was no rule in place specifically outlawing hits targeting the head. There are two unfortunate hits from the 2009-2010 seasons that paved the way for change in the NHL. The first was delivered on October 24, 2009, when the Panthers' leading goal scorer, David Booth, was blindsided by a hit to the head by Mike Richards of the Flyers. Booth doesn't remember the hit to this day, nor does he remember his time in the hospital. Richards was only given a 5-minute major for interference and a game misconduct by the officials, but no suspension. Later in the same season, star forward Marc Savard would get drilled with a hit to the head by Matt Cook, another hit to the head, another player stretchered off the ice, another controversy, but again, no suspension for the hit itself. There was outrage from the hockey world, seeking supplemental disciplinary justice against Richards and Cook. But the rules at the time didn't allow for these hits to be punishable. This was until the GM meetings later that year, where after several back and forths, a rare in-season rule change was implemented immediately. Rule 48 made it so any hit which targeted the head as the principal point of contact was prohibited and would be punishable. Since then, the rule has been tweaked a fair bit to make it easier to enforce, but in general has resulted in a significant decrease in the amount of concussions and head injuries. Before the rule change, hockey was by far the most dangerous of the Big Four North American sports, with a staggering 8.8 injuries per 100 players related to concussions and other head-related injuries in 2011. Since then, hockey has become one of the safest sports in this regard, accounting for only 1 injury per 100 players in the 2019 to 2020 season. It isn't perfect by any means, as we still see dangerous hits in the NHL from time to time, but it's a step in the right direction. In the early days of the NHL, players wearing helmets to protect their heads just wasn't a thing. It sounds ridiculous to even think about flying around on a slippery surface with literal knives attached to your legs without a helmet. But the guys who played in the early and mid-1900s were just built different. The Ace Bailey and Eddie Shore incident on December 12, 1933, was one of the first major events that started the discussions for helmets to be worn by players for their safety. On this day, Shore hit Bailey from behind, flipping him over backwards. This resulted in Bailey hitting his head on the ice, fracturing his skull. He hit his head so hard that a priest in attendance gave him his literal last rites. Thankfully for Bailey, He would go on to live for 60 more years, but his playing career was over in an instant. Ace Bailey's injury would lead to a few players wearing helmets, but they were still generally unpopular with fans, media, and other players at the time. This would change on January 13, 1968, when a 29-year-old Bill Masterton would suffer a brain injury after a hard hit. Like most players at the time, he wasn't wearing a helmet. He would later pass away some 30 hours after the hit on January 15th. To this day, he is the only player in NHL history to die as a direct result of an injury suffered on the ice. After this incident, helmet use gradually increased throughout the 1970s, until it was deemed to be mandatory for all new players coming into the NHL in August 1979 by then President of the NHL, John Ziegler. Looking back on it, it's crazy to think that hockey goalies didn't wear masks for decades. At the time, coaches were afraid that wearing a mask would impair their goalie's vision and would impact their play negatively. However, on November 1st, 1959, Jacques Plante broke his nose when he was hit by a shot 3 minutes into the game. He was taken to the dressing room for stitches, but when he returned to the game, he was wearing a crude homemade mask he had been using in practices. His coach, Toe Blake, was livid, but Plante refused to play without wearing the mask. Blake agreed to let Plante play with the mask for the game, but only on the condition that he discard the mask after his injury was healed. The Habs won that game and continued to win the next few games despite Plante's broken nose. After winning 18 straight games, Blake asked his goalie to stop wearing the mask, which Plante followed. But that night the Habs lost to the Red Wings and the mask returned for good after that. The rest, as they say, is history. Goalie masks are now a major part of the modern goaltender's on-ice personality, and their safety as well. I think every goalie should be thankful that Plante went on his 18-game win streak while wearing the mask, finally putting the myth that masks would interfere with a goalie's vision to bed. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a comment down below if there's a topic you would like me to cover, as I'm hoping to create high-quality hockey-related content on a regular basis and would love to get your feedback. If you enjoyed the video, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel as it helps my growth tremendously. Thank you.